Good evening and welcome to another edition of Down to the Wire. I'm your host, Derbyologist, and joining me again as co-host, capping with Candace. Candace here. Candace, this week we go to the Windy City. It's the annual Festival of Racing in Chicago from Arlington Park, and we're going to take a look at the all-stakes, all-turf, pick four, and it starts off with the American St. Leger. And last year, the Pizza Man won this race, and that was kind of a fan favorite in Chicago.
It was. I was there. People were really excited, obviously, having the local runner win the race. He won't be running in this race this year. Instead, he'll be running for the Million. But an intriguing race nonetheless. And I think, I'm looking at these races as playing them pick four because that's how I plan to play them. So I'm looking at this race as a race where I really, don't want to play that many horses. I want to kind of narrow it down here so I can spread later on in the sequence. For me, my top choice in here is going to be Lucky Speed. He comes in here. Having won one time in North America, that was in the Great Tunajinsky at Woodbine. A little bit of a tough race for him because it was a 9 furlongs, which is short of his best, and ran at kind of a dawdling, slow pace, which doesn't help him in any regard either. He should get more pace in here with the presence of the likes of AZ Ridge, who comes down for Canterbury, so I expect Lucky Speed to improve for pace and distance in this spot, and he'll be my top choice. Other horses who I would be looking to use here would be Calvados, who was very much hampered last time out, and I know Craig likes him, so I'll leave Craig to kind of elaborate on some of that. Another one who would intrigue me in this spot would be Roman Approval, who was just nipped by the Pizza Man out in the Stars and Stripes last out. I thought ran a very good race, being forwardly placed, and I think he might be able to sit in behind AC Ridge this time and kind of get the run of the race. So for me, Lucky Speed on top, Calvados, Roman Approval would be others who I'd be looking to use. But this is a race where I don't want to get too deep because I want to be able to spread later on.
Yeah, it's almost a mile and three quarters. Interesting. Team Valor, we'll be talking about some more of their horses later on in the show, but they have the Panama hat here in this race, and he's kind of interesting just because he's been racing in Ireland. And what a lot of people, once you kind of dig out some of the past performances, I think a lot of people are shocked at the amount of weight that they carry over in Ireland. This guy the last two times carried 137. He carried 134. He carried 140 pounds. So that's just kind of normal over there. But sometimes a lot of those, where it factors in is people, you really can't compare speed ratings and final times just because that much more weight on a course that is not a just straight course like the American courses. So sometimes it's kind of hard to determine that. Ultimately, I really love the angle of Lucky Speed, second off the layoff. But as you mentioned, I'm going with Calvados here. Had a rough trip the last time. And I think most handicappers saw it that day. And I think there was a lot of people, definitely made mental notes. And then now with so many handicappers watching replays, they're going to see kind of the check and the steady. So I think just based on a couple of steadies and a couple of checks, I really like the fact that Calvados stretches out, and he's really had good form in other races. So it's not like that was his only good race. I like the price 8-9 to 1. Do I want to single him at 3 or 4 to 1? Probably not, but I just think based on the last play and a rough trip and kind of some, not quite sold that, Lucky Speed maybe is not going to totally be cranked up yet. I think he's worth playing or at least throwing into a ticket, but Lucky Speed definitely has to be used as well.
Yeah, and you make a good point about Panama hat with the weight carried, and that's something people I think need to look at. Don't just toss races when you see that they're handicaps because they're not group level, because some of these horses were carrying top weight in those handicaps, and that can arguably make it a tougher race than, say a group 3 race. So if you see a horse in a handicap, bear in mind to see what the weight was carried compared to others, because when they're a high weight in a handicap, that's very tough.
Now, the Pizza Man is entered for this race. He won it last year, but all of the indications are saying that he is going to run in the Arlington Million. So should be a good race, and I think there's any one of 4 or 5 horses capable of winning this. The Grade 1 Secretariat, this race is traditionally, draws some of the interest of some of the better 3-year-old turfers in America just because of that Grade 1 status. And this year I thought the Euros sent over a couple of nice horses, and probably the best 3-year-old in America is at least running it in Force the Pass.
He is, and I'll start with Force the Pass. As he can't find anything wrong with his last 2 races, he ran really well. My only concern with him here would be his last run in the Belmont Derby. While he ran at well. It was very soft, 10 furlongs, being that, yeah, that very slow pace up front, and he ran up near it and just kind of inherited the lead a bit. So I'm a little bit worried that he doesn't truly stay this distance if it's run at a little bit more true to the distance. So I would be against him at a short price. He's one who I do not plan on using. For me, I look at this more of a two-horse race. I do quite like Highland Real. He is a horse who was very well thought of as a 2-year-old. Hasn't quite trained on to be of the level people thought he could. He's taken some time this year to kind of, really get his feet under him. But there's a few caveats in that. For one, Aidan O'Brien's stable at the beginning of the year, very few of his horses were running well, so nothing's been officially said, but it does make you wonder if something was perhaps going through the stable, or if his horses weren't as cranked up as he thought they, should have been, or whatnot. But at the beginning of the year, none of his horses were really running well aside from Glen Eagle, so wouldn't be too worried about a poor race in the beginning of the year. I thought he ran very, very well in the French Derby, finishing second behind New Bay in there. It seemed like really he had kind of figured himself out in that race, and then comes in here in good form, having won the Group 3 over at Goodwood last time out. He's an interesting type. I will say before races he does tend to get very lathered, very nervous, so if you're playing and you see that, don't be totally put off. That's him. And he also, maybe what I'm more worried about is he does have a tendency, when you watch his races, to want to veer left. And it seems like his jockeys can always get a hold of him. Hefferman rides him this time, who does typically ride for Aidan O'Brien. That's not any kind of a weird booking. Brian Moore is injured, so he couldn't come over, so Joseph O'Brien stayed over there with their stable horses on that side of the pond. But he does tend to want to veer left. We know last year Adelaide veered right all the way across the track, so you hope you don't have a similar thing coming from Highland Real and that Hefferman can keep him straight. The only horse I really foresee potentially beating Highland Real is War Dispatch. They have run against each other, with Highland Real nipping him, or getting the better of him, I guess I should say. But this is a smaller field, a little bit more of a tactical race. War Dispatch should get first jump on Highland Real, and if he does, I think he could potentially beat him, just because Highland Real takes that 3-4 steps to really get going when he's asked. So I'm going to use Highland Real and War Dispatch in here, and kind of take a stand against Force the Pass and the undefeated Italian horse Goldstream. With him, I really just don't rate that Italian form. I haven't seen any form lines come out of it that stand out to really, affirm that was a strong race as he's been running in. I also a little bit worry about his style. I think he's a little bit one-paced, and in those kind of steadily moderate tempo races you get in Italy, that works because you can just kind of run close and inherit the lead. But I expect this to be a very different race shape, so Goldstream will have to prove it to me. But he was bought for a lot of money by Australian Bloodstock with the intention of sending him to the Cox Plate, so obviously a lot of hype for this guy. But I'm going to try to go too deep here. Highland Real, War Dispatch.
Yeah, a lot of the same thoughts. Force the Pass, 4 for 6 wins, 2 seconds. I think this horse is going to take a lot of money, and probably rightfully so. But, I'm questioning whether he really wants this distance as well. I anticipate the fractions to be better than 50 for the half and 115 for 6 furlongs. But you never know. We've kind of the last few years, sometimes we see fractions that we're not used to seeing in some of these turf races. If it does become a sprint, Force the Pass will definitely be a horse that can out-sprint some of these horses, especially with that Spacetown breeding on top. So I'm kind of tossing him as well. I am a believer in the Italian horse, Goldstream, just because I like the fact that he won his first time out by a couple of lengths a mile in 140, carrying a lot of weight. That second race is kind of hard to gauge just because it was a 4-horse field. But I was impressed even with that 1 1/8 race. Anytime you start running a sub 151, 152 over there, just based on the courses and the layout, those are some impressive times. And, until a horse really loses, it's not like he's facing a bunch of proven 1 1/4 type horses. So I just know the Italian breeding and the Italian training, because this horse actually has Ireland breeding on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he's carried a lot of weight. I think there's a lot of things to like about him, but that doesn't really make him a single. But I think he's usable, and I think of the favorites, he'll probably go off at that 4-to-1 type price. What about the difference between those two that you mentioned? Uh, I noticed Highland Real gets Lasix and the other one doesn't.
Um, yeah, for me, that's not out of the ordinary. Anal Brand's horses typically always get lasings coming over here, so I think that's just the norm. They did the same for Adelaide, they did the same for Declaration of War, we saw them in the Breeders' Cup, so that's just the norm for them. And I mean, War Dispatch, I guess we know he doesn't bleed if they aren't giving him Lasix when he's coming over here. Same for Goldstream. Goldstream, being that he's planning to go the Cox Plate too, I just wonder if, they know he's not going to get it there, so, why have him have to be Lasix off in that race? Whereas with Aiden O'Brien, they did it with Adelaide and they were successful with it, so it's kind of like, don't change what worked for you last time, probably, sort of a thing. But you talked about some of the breeding with Goldstream, and, talking about this sort of a distance with him too. I wanted to say he is a half-sibling to a horse named Bit of Hell, who was groups replaced over this distance in Australia, listed winner in Italy. He's also from the family of some very nice horses, including Whack, who was runner-up in the Ashland, and a sister of Ali Sheba's Jam. So plenty of class and distance pedigree within his pedigree.
A horse that I did want to mention just because, I think his odds are really going to drift up in this race, and maybe rightfully so, but just as a handicapper, you always do that. Why is this horse in this race? And Granny's Kitten, when he lost to Force the Pass at Penn National, he had a couple of trip notes in that race and had a little bit of a rough trip. And then the last time, I think he was a victim of that pace. So this is the type of horse that could run I don't think he's 8 lengths worse than Force the Pass. I think it's more closer to that 3/4 of a length that he lost to him a couple of races ago. So if Granny's Kitten is just like a stupid price at 20-1, this is one of those ones where after the fact you're like, well, how did I not play a kitten on a turf race on a big day? So, maybe second and thirds and fourths, but definitely I don't think Granny's Kitten is completely outclassed in a spot like this.
Yeah, he's not. I mean, he wouldn't be my top pick to win this race, but he is one who, like you say, at a stupid price, he's not that far off these. So, if he drifts out to 20-1 or something crazy, I would definitely recommend throwing him in because he's close enough that that would be a really big price for him. And he is one they just keep breeding these same horses to Kitten's Joy, so he's a full of Kitten's Dumplings and a full of Granny Max Kitten.
The Beverly D is a grade 1, and this one brings in the defending champion in Euro Charlene. But I think the odds board is going to have 4 or 5 horses possibly at 5-6-1, and this seems like a race that you kind of have to spread around, or either that or really try to hone in on a couple of key handicapping factors.
Yeah, for me, this is the race I'm going to try to spread in these last 2 races. The horse I'm very much against here is Stephanie's Kitten at a short price. We kind of debated last time whether or not she was the same. I'm totally with you now. She's not the same. So I'm going to be looking to go against her and use some of the others here. For me, some of the ones who I'm looking to use is Wedding Vow. Really should be the favorite in here on form. If people don't bet her to favoritism, it's because they're just betting the defending champion, Euro Charlene, which is fine. But on form, I do think Wedding Vow's form really does stand a level above all of these. Her last 2 races have been spectacular. Winning last time out, or 2 back at the Curragh, and then being second behind Legatissimo, who is very well regarded overseas. So she is nice, and obviously at 3 years old, she gets that weight break here, with this being a weight for age race that Euro Charlene got last year. So that's always a help as well. What hinders her is her draw. Very tough from a wide draw in both the Beverly D and the Million because of the distance of the race and the positioning on the track. So she'll have the draw against her, but Wedding Vow, I think, is the horse who should win this race. Most likely should win this race. And I'll be using her. Another one I'll be using is Carla Bianca. She comes in here for Dermot Weld, who brings Pat Smolin to ride her as a typical rider, which always shows to me the intent. She's a filly by Dan Zilli, though they love American turf courses. There's been so many Dan Zillis over the years, especially in probably in the last 5 years, who seems like they've come over here and have just thrived on American racing. won last time out over LA Ball, who runs in the Million, and was second before that behind Words, who's a very well-regarded Aidan O'Brien filly. So this is a horse who's been running against some of the best. Maybe doesn't have quite the results of a Wedding Bow or a Euro Charlene, but one who I think has much more eligibility to improve. Coming over to American race, and Dermot Weld sure knows how to travel them. I think you could make a case he's the best in the world at traveling with horses, particularly routers. So, Wedding Bow, Carla Bianca, Euro Charlene I'm going to use. I just think she's classy. She tends to go forward, so I'm not super worried about the draw. Maybe the only worry for me is that she won't have one of her typical jockeys on her. Brian Moore is injured, so he couldn't ride her. Rode her last year in this race. Andrea Zani is suspended, who is her other typical rider, so she gets Lescano aboard, which is fine, but she has a little bit of a quirky type, so I would demand somewhat of a price on her, maybe 3 or 4 to 1 at least, just knowing it's a first-time jockey and a horse who does have some little quirks to her. And the other one I'm looking to use is Mango Diva, who last time out was second in behind Walk Close. Was decently close to some pretty fast fractions there. I thought she stayed on really well. She kind of got the lead late and then, was passed there at the end. I thought she ran a very nice race, and because she hasn't won here yet in America, I think she could go off at some sort of a stupid price. With Matt's being cold and her, not having run here yet. But I do think she figures, especially the way that I think the race will be run. We have some speed with Made on a Mission going forward. If Mango Diva can perhaps get first jump on some of these, I think she rates a chance to hit the board. So Wedding Bow, Euro Charlene, Carla Bianca, Mango Diva, the ones I plan on using, barring something crazy happening, with Carla Bianca being my top choice for the win.
Yeah, I think it's a race you can definitely spread 4 or 5 deep. I definitely have to take a long look at Lacey, the horse on the inside post. 20 to 1 morning line, but some solid German breeding, has run in some group races, gets first Lasix, strong connections, strong trainer. So that's definitely a horse who I like the way that she kind of seems to be, this seems to be her distance, like 1.25 miles, just shy of that seems to be her distance. So I think this really seems to suit her that way. I've been impressed with the improvement this year of What's the Chances. Coming into this year, she was clearly a grade 3, grade 2 type, but really she stepped it up. I was impressed with her win at Pimlico, and then the last time out at Woodbine, I thought she ran a good race, probably maybe a career best type race in that race. So I think she kind of fits. She's going to be my top pick. My big stand of the day is against Euro Charlene. I just see too many question marks at an 8 to 5 price. She won this race last year, but I think this is a much stronger field. I think Secret Gesture and Broken Vow and Lacey and those horses are a little bit better than some of the runners in last year's race. She's only had 3 races since then because there was some nicky-nacky injury type things. They ran her in Dubai, and granted she faced Solo that day, and he's won 8 in a row and probably ranked the best turf horse in the world. But I just think that's a lot of shipping, though. Like, then they shipped her there, and then, it just seems like she hasn't really had a plan this year, and I'm just not so sure that she's 1.25 miles type horse. I thought last year she just kind of got the rail trip and kind of survived the distance. I consider her more of a miler. So I think there's better horses suited to this distance. So she's my stand. I'm going to toss her out of my pick 4s and throw in 4 or 5 horses. What's the Chances is my top pick, but definitely going to include Broken Vow and Secret Gesture and Lacey. So I think it's a competitive race, but for me, I'm taking a stand against Euro Charlene, just thinking that she's going to be underlaid, and she doesn't really have, she may have a little bit of a class edge, but I'm just not so sure she has a conditioning edge, and she really likes this distance.
Yeah, and that's, I understand that, and that's, I think both of us are seeing reasons why she's probably going to end up being an underlay, which makes her tough for anybody to use. I mean, even if I want to use her, if she's getting, all the hype and getting, showing signs of being, really heavily played, well, then it gets tough because she doesn't tower over this field, and she shouldn't be an extremely short price in this field.
Should be an excellent rendition of the Beverly D. And then the 33rd annual Arlington Million. This is the race we finally get to see the Pizza Man come back to Chicago. 9 for 12 lifetime on the Arlington Park turf course. He's definitely going up in class, but you know what? This is the type of horse that I like, that, when the local horse fits, He's outrun all of his other conditions. Like, this is the type of race when you got a horse that's 6 years old and 9 for 12 in the turf course, you got to run him in the signature race at Arlington.
No, that's exactly it. And, for me, this is a very competitive race. I think that much better than last year. So I'm excited about that. And for me, this is a race that there's no standout. I mean, even if you're saying, okay, well, Big Blue Kitten and Slumber come here with the best form, even the two of them are just extremely hard to, pick which one is doing better. I look at the two of them as being extremely even, and if you're looking to play this race, within the race itself with a win bet, trifecta, exacta, whatnot, I would just use whichever one of them's the bigger price, and then toss the other one. I think you have to take a stand against one of them. If you use both, then, your possibilities of winning something, decent kind of go down the tubes a little bit there. You might end up hitting something where you lose money instead. But I look at them as even, and I would just use whichever one's the bigger price. Ultimately, for me, my top choice is going to be Legendary. Last time out, I thought he ran extremely well in the Manhattan, finishing third behind Slumber and Big Blue Kitten in there. But unlike them, the race shape was completely against him. They went very fast out front. He was able to make the lead. He was ran down late there. I just love the way he shaped in that race. I think, he tends to have to run races at shorter distances like he did this year. But once he got to this mile and a quarter, he just loves it. He needs this much ground. I think his forward placement is going to give him an advantage over some of these closers late, and there's a lot of closers in here, so you could easily get a traffic jam in behind him. I just think he's perfect for this race. Everything about him, he loves the firm ground. That tactical speed's going to be perfect. At a big price, I think Legendary can really make a splash in this race, and he's going to be my top choice in here. Like I said, I will end up using one of Slumber and Big Blue Kitten in my pick four. Which exact one, I don't totally know yet, but one of them, not both. Triple Threat, I plan on using. He ended up missing. He was supposed to run in the prep for this race. He ended up missing it when he spiked a fever. But all along they've still said he was going to come here, and he was just too good at Monmouth in his U.S. debut not to use him here. Maverick Wave, I think you have to use. This is a horse who has shown fantastic form for John Gosden and Godolphin overseas. He's better than a lot of the Europeans that come here. Whether or not he can act as well over firm ground, I don't know. That for me, that would be the concern. He has a lot of form over synthetic, and synthetic form in England tends to transfer to soft ground, which is what he won on last time, so the firm going will be a concern, but he is one who I'm going to use regardless. And the last one I'll use is Book Runner. This is a horse who hasn't quite ran against this caliber and hasn't quite got the distance, but it's an All-American pedigree. 'Tis now out of a Chester House mare named Take the Ribbon who ran over here. That, to me, I'm not worried about the distance with that pedigree. He acts over this going. First time Lasix makes me think that, maybe he's bled, or maybe they want to sell him here with that pedigree. That, would be one that I think American buyers would appreciate. Something along those lines, but I do think he's a very interesting type at a big price. But as you can see, I think I got to 5 horses there, so really want to go small in those first 2 legs. Try to keep it to 2 or 3 horses, so that in these last 2 you can go 4 or 5 deep, because it's just so tricky here late, and there's so many horses in this race, it's hard to just say, I'm only going to use 1 or 2.
Yeah, in these wide open races, and as long as you don't have like an 8-5 or 7-5 in these races, then you can afford to put a few more dollars into a pick 4 or pick 3 just because it's going to pay a little bit more. The pools will be big. Some of the factors that I looked at when I was handicapping this race was, I definitely think Up With the Birds is not in top career form, but I do respect the fact that Graham Mosham's had another month to get him ready for this race. So I definitely think he's capable of improving off that last effort. Now, he's not one of my top 3 or 4 picks, but I do think it's one of those horses that if he were to improve by a couple of lengths, which is not impossible, they could kind of put him back in the mixture again. I ended up going with the big German, Wake Forest, just because I like the fact that he gets Lasix. For those of you who don't follow a lot of the German racing, they run long races in Germany, a mile and a half, a mile and three quarters. A lot of their major races are actually 2 mile races. So they usually can get the distance. They don't allow any drugs at all in Germany, and they don't allow any horses to even breed if they've been on drugs, and they have to have all. So there's not very many German breds bred, but they're top quality horses, compete with any horses in the world. They go to the Arc, they run in some of the big races in Dubai. They run very competitively in some of the big meets, even at Ascot and things like that. So
Mm-hmm.
I think the connections are very solid on this horse. I think the trainer is very good. The one thing is, does he have the quick turn of foot like a Slumber or a Big Blue Kitten? Probably not. I think what he wants is a grouped up field and then just make a long drive for it going into the turn. So a lot of it's going to be, is he in the clear when he finally starts his run? And I'm hoping he's sitting like seventh or eighth and not behind Big Blue Kitten or Slumber as they get halfway down the stretch, because I just think they'll out quicken a horse like that. But the drop in weight and definitely the conditioning edge, I just think that he could grind out a victory if it kind of becomes a grinder's race.
Yeah, and I think that's the pace and how the race is up is kind of the key for both of our choices. I think in an ideal world, we'd like to see both of our choices more forwardly placed and maybe with a strung out field to kind of keep those closers a little bit more work to do. But as you say, I mean, top connections for Wake Forest. His trainer won the Melbourne Cup last year with Protectionist, so he knows how to win a big race on an international stage.
Now, are you pretty much convinced that Shining Copper is the pace setter here for Ramsey, and that really should set up for a fair pace for the rest of the horses if he is used in that role?
I think he is, but I'm starting to wonder if their idea of a pacemaker is different than everybody else's because it just seems like every time that they've been using pacemakers for Stephanie's kitten, they don't go actually that fast. I might be mistaken, but they haven't seemed like they've been going that fast out front. But luckily with Shining Copper, I think he's a little bit more proven in this sort of a role. In the United Nations, he was pacemaker for Big Blue Kitten, and he went out pretty fast. So I'm confident that that's his role.
What about Triple Threat? I know you quickly mentioned him. There's a lot of talk about this horse in March and April. Team Valor was very vocal about how they had purchased this horse. Um, Distance breeding, he's by Monsoon, one of the great German sires, out of a Lafard mare, which is a classic uh, distance mare. Uh, Missed his prep race, but his one race in America at Monmouth, I mean, he really didn't have a good move. He kind of only ran about the last 16th of a mile, but it was good enough to win. He kind of just hung around and then just kind of won on class.
Yeah, that's kind of what I saw, but I think that sort of a race also, we talk about this with dirt racing. I think it's no different with turf, is that there's a big difference between a mile and eighth and a mile and a quarter. And we talked about like the 3-year-old dirt races last week when we were saying, at a mile and an eighth, there's a lot more horses who are competitive and can really, dig in and provide for a competitive field. But at a mile and a quarter, there's a lot less horses who really can stay that sort of a trip. So I think him winning at a mile and an eighth at that sort of a distance when he really wants further says a lot about his class level because that race was too short.
Well, Team Valor brought out, horses in 3 of the 4 races. And uh, what about jockeys in this race? I know there's a few horses with some new jockeys. And then just overall kind of, I think a lot of the people, whether they're betting him or not, I think the Pizza Man does kind of have his own cult following.
He really does have his own following, and deservedly so. You like to see these local horses win races. It's always fun for the crowds when they come out there. So I think that's very well deserved. And I mean, you can't knock his jockey, Florent Geroux, who's very, very good on kind of this Midwest circuit. As far as some of the other jockeys, I think, for the internationals, you want to see if they have regular jockeys or jockeys that typically work for those trainers come out here. I think Book Runner having Gerald Mosse come out is very interesting. I mean, often, they could just take a jockey who's already here, but instead getting someone to fly out for the race specifically usually says something about the class of the horse. So, I think that him coming out's a big deal. Buick coming up from Maverick Wave. Buick is one of the top riders for Godolphin, so again, makes sense. Pat Smolin coming up for LA Vol, Jamie Spencer coming up for Belgian Bill. So you always think that's a good sign whenever you have jockeys from overseas coming over and, matching up with these sorts of runners, especially when they're only coming up for one race. I think, like Jamie Spencer, I think this is the only race he's running in, is for Belgian Bill.
Yeah, I was kind of depressed for a couple of days because I found out Decabrist wasn't running in the Secretariat.
I know, I thought he was going to be in there.
Yep, and that really would have added some quality just because he could have put another Derby race on his past
Doesn't
performances.
he have like
And
the
then
4.5 furlong record or something? He could have done just zoom.
shoot out of there. And then, this is the first time in 5 years I actually won't have to handicap side glance in this race.
Oh.
So for, handicappers like you that have only been in the game for 3, 4 years, I assumed you just thought by now that he was kind of like the NBA. Like every year you have the Boston Celtics, and every year in the
Maybe we have
Arlington
side
Million,
glance in the
yeah, they
Arlington
had side
Million.
glance. Yep.
Yeah, no, I didn't even think about that he wasn't here. I know. Well, we have a kitten.
What
We
about
always
Belgian
have a
Bill?
kitten,
He's kind
right?
of interesting. Yeah, we still
Belgian.
got kittens. Belgian Bill, this guy, he ran in Dubai, he ran in
Yes.
Turkey, but he's
Yeah.
also ran at Ascot.
Yeah.
I mean, he's kind of a world traveler. He kind of is the new Side Glance and Dandino all rolled into one.
Yeah, he kind of is. I mean, um, he runs in England most of the time. He's kind of one of these that he goes in England during their season. He goes in Dubai then over the winter. So unlike a lot of flat horses in Europe where, they kind of tend to run from March-ish, maybe late February, early March, through until September, October, um, he really kind of runs all year long because in the off season he's over hanging out in Dubai. Turkey, where he runs, that's their one big international meeting that he ran at, so it actually ends up being a lot of British horses running there for the most part, so don't think of that as like really bad racing. That's kind of their one really good meeting that they have, that it's an invitational and a lot of horses come from overseas. But yeah, he's kind of that traveler type, honest horse. I just think he's a little bit outclassed here, but we know that he'll likely travel well, which is always important because you see it from time to time. I know last year being there on site, Dandino, when he came in, he did not look up to his quality, so you wonder if he didn't travel well. I mean, even Real Solution, he didn't have to travel very far. I think he was just training at Saratoga, and he didn't look up to his normal standards either. So the travel does make an impact, and if you're planning on playing, these sorts of races, I certainly would recommend watching these post parades. It's even more important when you have so many horses traveled in because oftentimes, you'll have horses who just didn't take the travel well.
With YouTube, you can watch some of these races over the years. And what I find is interesting, I've always told you, I don't really call a horse race if it's only got 5 horses or less, because I think it's more about pace and tactics and things like that. But then also on the other end, like this Bill guy, I mean, he's ran in 31 horse fields, 25 horse fields, 28 horse fields. I almost think it's the opposite. I don't think you can really gather anything from that either because it's just a big jumble. Like one time he was 17th, but he only lost by 9 lengths.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends. This is where you need to dig up the races and find the courses and, find out what, how those races were run. Sometimes these handicaps, it sounds like complete chaos, but sometimes they're run, like, say, over a straight line mile. Well, now, it's not as crazy as it sounds because you don't have turns to navigate with a bunch of horses. Nobody's caught 10 wide or anything of that liking. And, that's something I'd recommend for all these races. When you're looking at these European contenders, look up the courses that they're running at. Some of these courses, like Goodwood, where several of these horses ran at Goodwood last time in the Glorious Goodwood meeting, that's a very, very quirky course where you kind of have dog legs in it. So at times, horses are kind of running left-handed and then right-handed at times. It's predominantly right-handed, but you're kind of going in both directions. So it's almost a little reminiscent of, we know, the downhill course at Santa Anita, where you want to be on the outside because it really will end up being the inside. So you have a couple situations like that that can affect races as well. Typically you want to find horses who've done well on flat tracks, and you want to find horses who've done well, going, the same direction as our races on tight courses. So those would be my suggestions. You can easily Google, what are these courses, what direction are the turns, is it a flat or an undulating track? So those would be things to look up.
Yeah, and one of the things, whenever you get a bunch of shippers on this type of day and even on Breeders' Cup Day, is that I think people put too much into the results. Sometimes horses just don't ship. So, if a really highly regarded horse doesn't run well, sometimes it's just that simple. Like you can't try to say, oh, that was handicapable. It just,
Mm-hmm.
a horse didn't run. And so, I think we saw that a few times last year on Breeders' Cup Day that a few horses just didn't run. And
Yeah.
out of all these horses tomorrow, there'll be a few horses that just don't show up. And I think people right away will start talking about form lines and class and this and that. And all it is just a horse just didn't show up today and move on to the next race.
Yeah, and I think the last thing maybe for some of these horses traveling into is if you can get any source of info on intentions, that matters too. I mean, we talked about Goldstream and Highland Reel are both intended to run at the Cox Plate. Obviously, this Secretary was used for Adelaide successfully last year, so it's kind of a prep for them on the way to Australia. But last year we had horses too that came over here just to judge. I think they'd planned to sell her at Canelan. We had a horse that was a private sale after the meeting. So a lot of times you have different intentions too, and sometimes the horses that haven't done don't have a stronger form, they actually come here and are really gunning for this win specifically. It's not a prep for anywhere else. So try to get a hold on intentions if you can.
Should be an exciting day in Chicago. Arlington Park usually puts on a great show. If you're watching from the simulcast feed, they'll have, the track will be decorated up. They'll have music between the races. They'll have some extra paddock analysts in there. And so and the betting handle will be solid on this card. So this is one of those cards that long before all of these other big days came across the track, Arlington's been doing a big day here for 25, 30 years. So it's always a big day. That's going to do it for another edition of Down to the